Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Kelly, can I get you to say hello?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Well, Kelly and I have known each other for a couple decades now, and I've always respected Kelly's experience and expertise in the field. And in addition, Kelly and I also share a heart for fixing things, for making things better. And we both get plenty of chances in our work that we do for community associations, and we like it when we can lead association leaders to reach that aha moment when they figure something out and are able to eliminate or minimize the mistakes or conflicts that have been bogging down their association. Well, in today's session, we'll address a few of the most common root causes of conflict that we see at associations. So hopefully one by one, over a period of time, you can begin to change the culture and atmosphere of your association from a toxic one to a successful one. And as Paige indicated earlier, we want to help our boards and managers so that the owners can live peacefully and productively in their associations. Well, we hope you're taking some notes, but like all our webinars, we're recording this session so you can find it and replay it on YouTube and other websites for future playback. Another resource is an outline of today's program that we're going to send to everyone who fills out a brief survey at the end of today's session. So please fill out that survey and make sure you add some comments about what you'd like to hear in future webinars. We got a couple of great suggestions in the other webinar session that we did, so I'm going to put you guys on the task, homework assignment, to think about what you'd also like to hear. We are regularly developing sessions that try to respond to the needs of our audience, and so we're looking forward to your insights to tell us what's valuable or important to you. And as Paige said, this course is now approved for CE credit through CAM-ICB. This is the commercial that we need to show on screen. Those of you who indicated in the registration process that you were interested in getting CAM-ICB certification, please be patient. Paige will get those certificates to you within about a week. Kelly's going to start today's session sharing a few of his insights, but first I want to remind you that if at any time you have a question for Kelly or myself later, you can simply type that question into the dialog box that you see. It's probably on the right side of your screen, similar to the one that I'm showing here in the center. And Kelly and I enjoy speaking to a live audience, so if at any point in time we have a question where we're looking for your response, we may ask you to raise your hands if you're still hanging with us. And the way you do that is by grabbing your mouse and clicking on the little hands raised icon that appears like the one that you see on screen. So let's give that practice right now. Grab your mouse and give me a hands raised if you're ready to hear from Kelly. Looking up and down the list of names. Kelly, we have a sharp group with us today. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. And Kelly, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Let me make sure I've got this set properly. Did I do this right? Oh, good.
There you go.
All right.
Full screen?
Well, good afternoon. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Welcome, everybody, this afternoon to this session of our presentation on conflict. And gosh, I think as a lawyer dealing with the effects of conflict, lawsuits and hostility and angry associations and recalls and sometimes even violent situations, I think we lawyers and often managers spend a ton of time dealing with the aftermath and trying to figure out how to fix or respond to conflict when it's already gotten out of hand. I think what we'd like to do today, Robert and I would like to talk a little bit more about the deeper cause of conflict and the destruction that it causes in community association neighborhoods. I often feel like I'm sort of like the firefighter or the emergency room doctor. I spend so much time dealing with injuries and disasters that I don't have time to think about how did this all start. But after about 30 years of working with common interest communities, as of this year, I find myself increasingly focusing on how did we get here? How did we get to this situation? And what were the factors that made this worse or that made this so much more likely to happen. So today we're not going to talk at all about conflict itself or the damage conflict can cause or how to resolve conflicts once they've gotten out of control, but we're going to focus on the root issues and the underlying attitudes and misunderstandings that foster an environment where conflict is more likely to occur. So we're going to focus on the roots today. One of the first things that we have to recognize, in fairness to managers and volunteer directors and associations, is that you have neighborhoods that have self-governance, and the directors and by extension the manager are called upon to occupy so many hats. You're asked to be the enforcement mechanism. You're asked to be the judges to determine, you know, how to apply the rules of the association and what type of penalties will be assessed against homeowners. And then you're also the executioner in that you have to carry out whatever decisions that you make. So it doesn't look like much fun, right? There's a lot of pressure on directors who serve as volunteers because you're pulled in so many different directions. And gosh, you know, you're volunteers. You're doing this typically in the evenings after your day job. So it starts by recognizing all the different ways that you're pushed. When we're dealing with the undercurrents of conflict and how to avoid conflict, I want to suggest that whether you're an attorney in the confidential community world, or you're a manager, or you're a community association leader, that I think a key role that is underappreciated and certainly underused is the role of teacher. That we don't want to have people serving as volunteers on their homeowner boards forever. We want a healthy rotation, and rotation happens for a variety of reasons anyway. We have to recognize that we're always teaching, we're always educating the homeowners and the committee chairs and the members of our boards of directors. Education is really key in this, helping people have healthy, reasonable expectations, help them understand how the law works, how their documents work. That's really key to reducing the environment where conflict can flourish. So let's start with opening assumptions in terms of who you're dealing with. It's very often tempting to respond to somebody who is in disagreement or even hostile toward the board, deeply critical of your efforts as a board or manager, to assume that the person you're dealing with is just a nasty person. And on the other hand, there's a temptation to the people that are supportive of the board to give them greater access and give them greater credibility. But the truth is, as most things in life in between, it's not fair or reasonable to assume that somebody is completely evil. I know that in our current political climate, it seems like that's the way everything works now, is you're either all good or you're all bad. But it's not true. It's not fair in the HOA world any more than it's fair in any other walk of life. That person who may seem angry and hostile right now, most of the time, almost always, they really think that their position, that their view is helping the association and that you're missing something important. And people who are really supportive of the association, well, they might have other things that other agendas that just because they're supportive of the board, we might be ignoring other things that we need to pay attention to. The temptation is to ignore the person who's hostile to the board and just assume that they're no good and they're no help, and let's just let them have their piece and we'll go on and listen to the next person. That's not good. That's dangerous. Even the people who are hostile toward the association may have some great ideas from time to time, and they may have a viewpoint that we at least need to acknowledge. We also don't want to just assume that somebody who's friendly and supportive of the board, that everything they say is gospel and that we should follow it, because it may not be good advice. It may not be good input. So we've got to really look in the middle. Nobody's purely bad. Nobody's purely good. We don't have just saints and sinners. We have people in between in our communities. And I think just recognizing that very human cultural temptation to pigeonhole people into one envelope or the other is what, if we can fight that, that begins the process of a healthier attitude toward the homeowners in the communities that we manage or that we govern. And as lawyers, we have to do the same thing. Another thing that we have to understand is that in the real estate market, we set people up almost for failure, at least in our American culture. We don't really embrace, we Americans don't really embrace culturally the notion of shared ownership. We really like independence. We like our property. Well, the very feature that makes common interest communities work and gives them advantages is that commonality. A lot of our homeowners that are coming into condo or planned development communities, they're very happy to embrace the benefits of common interest ownership, but they don't want to recognize the things that they give up in that common interest in shared ownership or shared governance. So one of the first things we have to help people understand is that this is a give and take, that you receive the benefits of other people taking care of things for you. You receive the benefit of a beautiful community where all the houses, all the homes look nice. Well, the way that happens is by everybody agreeing to work together and not to just unilaterally make changes to the buildings and paint their house purple. So one of the things that we have to help educate folks is, remember, this is shared ownership, shared control, responsibility, and cost. And that word shared is something that other countries, other cultures in the world really seem to embrace. Many other parts of the world, I've had the good fortune to visit a variety of countries and talk to people about their common interest communities and how they operate them. And when I describe to them our system of boards and directors and committees and CC&Rs, I usually get a reaction of a head shake, because a lot of other places in the world, they have learned to embrace the notion of shared ownership without very complex governance structures. But, well, this is our culture. And so one of the things that we have to really recognize is that we are having to re-educate, help culture, help move people towards this reality economically of shared ownership. And it never is more obvious than we're dealing with exclusive use common areas, patios, balconies, front porches, areas that are typically clearly designed for one owner to use and enjoy. But in the condo context in particular, those areas are normally exclusive use common areas. They're not owned by the owner. It's common property that is owned in common by all of the owners in that condominium project, but it's exclusively used. Well, a lot of our owners come in and they see the word exclusive and they stop with that. We need to help remind them, because probably before they bought, nobody ever explained to them that you don't own that beautiful little patio or that townhouse yard. You may not own that little yard behind your townhouse condo. You may not own that deck. That very well may be exclusive use common area, which means it's jointly owned by everyone in the community. In a planned development project, it's really kind of similar. We have individual lots, and a lot of times people think, well, why can the HOA tell me anything? I own this lot. Well, the covenants that tie you all together as a community are the device that helps us keep properties looking nice. So we have to be very sensitive to the fact that a lot of our owners never really fully embrace the notion that it's not mine, that it's really ours. So that certainly is the root of a lot of disputes. And similarly, an outgrowth of that is the unrealistic expectations that your condo owner or your cooperative owner typically has regarding attached housing. They think that because they paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for something and they got a deed or a share of stock, that somehow that is different than the apartment that they lived in. And they think of it as, well, I have a deed, so it's my castle. Nobody can tell me what I can do. Nobody can tell me to turn my music down at 2 in the morning when I'm listening to that jazz album, because it's my castle. And of course, that's not true. And of course, they also aren't completely independent. We share a building. We have interconnection with all the other owners in our association. So it can be a little bit of a jolt to a condo owner who doesn't realize that they bought an apartment, that it's still an apartment in its basic nature, but now they own title to that apartment, and they still very much need to get along with their owners, their neighbors, and their neighbors need to get along with them. Similarly, a lot of, probably the majority of home buyers look at the governing documents, the CC&Rs, the bylaws, and any association operating rules as simply boilerplate. They close escrow, they get a big stack of association governing documents, and guess where it goes? It goes in the drawer along with the operating manual for the dishwasher and the warranty information for the washer dryer, and right next to the manual for the lawnmower. It sits in a drawer. And the unfortunate truth is that CC&Rs, recorded covenants on the property, are legally a contract that binds all the owners in that community. They may not have signed that contract, but because it's recorded on their property, it automatically binds them as if they did sign it. So it's every bit as important as the purchase agreement that they signed during the escrow process, but they don't know that. So the first time the association comes to them and says, hey, you're violating Article 6, Section 4, they're shocked, genuinely shocked, because nobody ever told them that they really needed to read all this before they became owners. So a lot of times, you managers, you board members are going to be the first people to tell them about something that's in that document because, truth be told, they never even looked at it. So you're going to get an initial reaction of pushback as people struggle to deal with this surprise. Shouldn't have been a surprise, but it is. So again, I want to hark back again to the notion of managers and lawyers and board members as educators of their neighbors. Another factor that results in avoidable conflict, misunderstanding, and unfortunately hostility relates back to the old parable of the elephant and the blind monks. This is an old piece of art that illustrates that parable where all the blind monks were introduced to an elephant at the same time, and each of them was placed at a different spot on the elephant. And as they all called out their experiences, of course, they were dramatically different than what anybody else experienced. Now, the monk that's holding on to the elephant's tusks, he has one description, one view of what that animal must be like, and it's going to be completely different from the monk who's holding on to the elephant's leg. Are either of them lying? They're both saying something completely different at the same time in the same basic place, but they're both experiencing a completely different reality. You as managers and board members, I want to say something shocking, you might not know everything. There might be things you don't know. And I can guarantee you that your homeowners don't know what you know. They don't have the benefit of the board packets and greater access to the manager and sitting in the board meetings and reading committee reports. There's a lot they don't know. So recognize that. Don't be so quick to assume hostile motives and evil intent when you're in a disagreement with a homeowner, and don't overreact when they're shocked and they're upset with you. Give them a moment to absorb what you know. Share what you know. Listen to what they know, and see if you can lower the temperature level before it gets out of hand and rolls into some kind of a boiling dispute. Because you both are seeing different things. You both are experiencing different things. Nobody's lying. You just all need to share your experiences for greater harmony and less dispute. I think in summing up this area of dealing with homeowners, I really believe very, very strongly that conflicts typically begin with a knowledge deficit, not a morality or integrity deficit. Everybody just wants to live and enjoy their home. Nobody wants to be a bad neighbor. They don't think they're being a bad neighbor. As lawyers, managers, and board members, I think our job is to help close that knowledge gap, is to help explain the things that for whatever reason wasn't explained to them when they were in escrow, when they joined the association as an owner. And that can diffuse a lot of these conflicts before they get out of hand and keep them from becoming a very serious situation that can hurt relationships for many years. And I'm sure if we had another hour, we could all share war stories about some of the crazy conflicts that have happened between neighbors or between the board and the association and individual members, some of the crazy things people have done. But we don't have time. So let me switch to conflict within the board of directors, conflict within the governing body in my last few minutes with you. The first thing that we need to note is that as a volunteer director, there's some really important things that you need to unlearn about what I call your daytime experience, your day job versus your night job. The volunteer experience is very, very different than the experience in the workplace. And let me start by showing the chain of command. The chain of command, we all learned about chain of command from elementary school, right? We had our grade school teacher Then we learned that the grade school teacher had a department head, and over the department head was a principal. Over the principal later on in life we learned was a school superintendent, and then maybe by high school we learned there was something called a school board. There's always somebody over you, and there's often somebody under you, and you all have responsibility, and you boss some people around and somebody else bosses you around. Whether you're in education, the military, private business, pretty much the same. Well, that's your day job. Yeah, that works well in the day job, but your volunteer job as a community leader is completely different. The chain of command is horizontal. It's a group. It's no one person. It's 5 or 7 or 9 typically. It could be as small as 3. I've seen boards as big as 11. That's the chain of command. The group speaks. The group is the boss. And that's a really critical shift in your understanding. And if you don't make that shift successfully, you're going to have problems with the rest of the directors in your board, because board work is a team sport. No matter how smart you are, no matter how right you are, no matter how hard you've worked, you're one vote on that board. And the board hasn't spoken and the corporation hasn't acted until the board takes a vote. So you can't run off on your own. No matter how much you think that you have the right answer, you've got to wait for the group to catch up with you. Similarly, the day job president. Now, this slide I originally made for a different seminar a number of years ago, and Mr. Obama, you remember, he did not have a Democratic Congress. So to get things done, he used executive orders quite a bit. Well, the United States president has a lot of power. The United States president is the boss of a lot of things. That's a day job president. On the right of the screen, of course, this slide was from a television show. You may remember it. And Mr. Trump, who, when I created this slide many years ago, I never dreamed the situation that we'd be in today, where he would be the follower of Mr. Obama. But he had a tagline. You remember the tagline? You're fired. All right? Well, that's the day job president, but that's not the HOA president. The HOA president is completely different. The HOA president has very little real power. You have one vote. You may set the agenda, you may call the meeting to order, but you're not the HOA's boss. The board is the boss. Those 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 7, whatever your majority is, they are the boss. And you have to wait as president for the vote. You don't get to fire your other board members. You don't get to fire your neighbors. You have to build consensus and work as the team. And if you can learn this different paradigm and really understand that what worked really well for you when you were the boss of a major corporation, or you were a general manager of a whole division, or a very successful entrepreneur, that same style of being the boss will destroy the unity of your board, because we have to build teamwork. So we need to learn that different method of how we see ourselves to be really effective and harmonious as we govern as a board. So we've talked about the association versus members. We've just talked about governance and harmony and avoiding or reducing conflict within the governing body. Now, in the bigger picture, I want to talk about associations in the larger sense, and recognizing that associations have to juggle 4 distinct worlds. They have to pay attention to 4 interests. And those 4 interests are the corporate interests, the business interests, the real estate project, and the community. And each of those interests have to be balanced for the association to be truly healthy. Now, in a moment, I'm going to toss it over to Robert, but I want to make a few more observations about this very important concept before I leave you from this slide. First of all, did we go to that? Did we lose that slide? Okay. Well, as we're going to switch for that slide in just a moment. But the first interest we want to talk about is the corporate interest. The corporate interest is the legal interest of the association. The association has covenants and bylaws and rules and corporate procedures, and we have to have motions and seconds and keep minutes. Those are all really important. We have to enforce the rules. We have to make sure that we have written contracts. Well, those are all really, really important. But that's not the only thing. That has to be balanced against the other interests. So what does it look like when an association underemphasizes the corporate interests? Well, if we have a president who's just totally running everything and not getting board votes on anything, and it's being run like a small business, well, the corporate interests are being completely ignored. If we have an association that ignores all the formalities and there are no board votes and things are done, over the telephone and nothing's documented, that's an example of an association that's ignoring the corporate interest. What about the business interest? That has to be balanced too, right? Well, the business interest, of course, is you're collecting money from the members, you're making budgets, you're spending money, you're saving money in the reserves, you make sure that the money is being spent wisely. Those are all really critical functions. But is that the only thing that matters? If that's the only thing that matters, then you're probably going to completely disregard the corporate interests, because the most efficient thing is to not worry about the business judgment rule and make sure that only one director makes all the decisions, because that's faster. And let's get the low bid, no matter whether or not they're licensed or insured, because we're really more concerned about the cost than making sure that we have the appropriate legal protections. You see what I mean here? The business interest, if it's underemphasized or overemphasized, can really throw the association out of kilter. Another hallmark of an association that is overemphasizing the financial side, often they view their job as not being financially healthy, but they view the business aspect as just making sure assessments are as low as possible, and frankly lower than possible. You see an association president that brags, well, our assessments haven't been increased in 10 years, yay us. Well, what has been happening during those 10 years? I know that the expenses in my home in Pasadena have gone up over the last 10 years. So how did the board do that? Well, they did it by deferring maintenance, shortcutting projects, avoiding things that needed to be done, and almost certainly cheating on their reserve deposits, not putting the money into the account that the reserve the reserve study provider told them they need to do, and generally bringing the association into a position where actually it's financially very unhealthy. That's what happens when the business interest is misapplied to the interest of the association. And of course, the real estate project, that's a very fundamental role, right? The board of directors has an obligation to maintain and repair the common area, the amenities of the association. The Plan Development Association Board wants to make sure architectural conformity is kept so that everything looks nice and consistent. Well, what does it look like if that's the only thing that matters? Well, if that's the only thing that matters, then we'll probably paint everything once a year, and money is no object. We want this thing to be gorgeous and perfect. No, that doesn't happen very often. What often happens, in my view, is that an association can become unhealthy because assessments and the budget has been so artificially squeezed downward that there's no money to properly maintain and repair things, and the money for the repairs, the deferred maintenance, eventually those chickens come home to roost in the form of a major, major expense that the association is completely unprepared to undertake because it wasn't ready. The community aspect, the final aspect I want to talk about before I toss it to Robert, is something that frankly we association lawyers don't do a very good job of mentioning. We don't talk about it much. We talk so much about the legal things and financial requirements and disclosures and obligation to maintain and repair, but this is still a neighborhood. This is a neighborhood that was created by covenants that tied everybody together, and the decisions you make as a manager, a board, or even a lawyer, those affect people. And you need to balance the impact on the community in making your decisions. For example, there may be a major decision the board of directors has every legal power to make to embark upon a major repair of the project. Does that mean that you don't have to tell anything to the homeowners? Well, legally, no. But if you're concerned about the community interest, you may call for a town hall meeting. You may take input from the homeowners. You may have an extra meeting to disclose things to the homeowners to make sure that they're comfortable with what their association is doing, that they feel informed and connected. See, the community interest is the same interest that sometimes makes a board issue a warning to a violating homeowner instead of automatically, rigidly enforcing every single rule every single time. You have to balance these four interests, and my experience in seeing many, many associations that have been in very great dysfunction is almost always you can trace it back to a failure to properly balance one or more of these interests. When your association is in turmoil, when things are really going badly, take a step back and ask yourself, have we appropriately paid attention to each of these four interests? And that will help you find your way back to a more stable association, is realizing, oh, we've got to balance this here. And that can lead to a much more healthy association and dramatically reduce the probability of conflict. So again, it comes down to education, understanding your role, and balance, if I had to wrap this seminar up. So Robert, I appreciate your patience in waiting to tell us about the financial side, but I know money issues can lead to conflict in associations too, can it?
Absolutely. Kelly, thank you very much. I found myself just fascinated and enjoying your presentation. There is a lot to do with balance, and it takes a lot of time and energy to do exactly what you're talking about. And not only time and energy, but the dollars. And when we're talking about dollars, and I talk about scarcity, but time is a scarce commodity, and energy that people have after a full day coming home and realizing, okay, I have a board meeting tonight, there's only so much energy that a person has. So scarcity reveals problems. It reveals those sensitive pressure points, and it can come from a number of different sources. So what we're here today to do is help people understand, okay, where are those pressure points, and how can we help you identify what they are and maybe make them go away a bit before they get to be a big problem. So follow along for a few minutes, and I'll talk about perhaps some minor adjustments you can make in the way you see your financials or where you talk about your financials that can hopefully make a big difference to reduce financial conflicts at your association. And the first one is just understanding that you may be aiming at the wrong objective, and that's the associations that are trying to minimize expenses, keeping those homeowner assessments constant for year after year after year. That's just foolish. Cost control is great. I'm all for cost control, but we live in an inflationary economic environment, and associations need money to sustain and to thrive. And there's what we see too much is too many associations making cost cutting their primary objective. They forget their primary responsibility, the board's primary responsibility, is to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association, and that takes dollars. Squeezing those dollars too hard causes stress, and that happens when they're expecting that the fairy godmother is going to rescue them and everything's going to be okay. It's just, that's fantasy land, that's not reality. So creating a deficit budget and struggling to trying to live within a fantasy land deficit budget, that's associations that is dooming itself to failure, scarcity, conflict that comes from that. There's always going to be surprises. And those may be bad debt, delinquencies, some weather-related issues, insurance deductibles, touch-up repairs, and also the reserve contributions. You can't forget those. And if you didn't have enough money last year, and if you didn't increase your assessments enough, you're going to have the same problems this year. So don't plan on being rescued by the fairy godmother. I hope this is not news, but if we look at associations out there, it looks like there is a whole lot that still believe in the fairy godmother. Another source of conflict is inadequate reserve contributions. It may seem like a solution excused away because the reserve projects are far into the future, but let me take that a step further. Yes, the reserve projects may be far into the future, but the reserve contributions occur every month on an ongoing budgeted basis because indeed the deterioration occurs on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and it is appropriate for homeowners to be paying their fair share, offsetting that deterioration with appropriately sized contributions. So you're not paying for the future. As board members, as managers, and as homeowners, you need to understand that your reserve contributions offset ongoing deterioration. It's paying your fair share for the time that you own a home in the association. It's fundamentally the way to run an association fairly without pushing burdens out onto the future. And another problem is failure to maintain. You see a picture of a welder working on a pool fence here. That started as a great idea when the board said, let's not paint the fence. It's totally fine. No big deal if it gets a little dry and rusty. Fences look like that everywhere. Well, that's expensive because the cost to repair is $50 to $80 a lineal foot. That's $50 to $80 a lineal foot, whereas the cost to paint that would have prevented this is more like $5 to $10 a lineal foot. So sometimes when you save a little bit of money, it ends up costing you a lot of money. And that's the same for asphalt care, roof care, other paint projects, decking care projects. That's money well spent. It saves the association money. Let me say that again. Proper, timely maintenance saves the association money. And here's another mindset. I alluded to this a moment ago. Reserve contributions are not a luxury. They're not something that just some associations can afford. The roof will fail, and the homeowners will pay for it one way or another. The only question is, will they pay for it in stable, fair, budgeted contributions, or will they pay for it in a special assessment? And I certainly hope that you don't pay for it in deferred maintenance that drags down property values, which is the most expensive way to pay for a project when you lose equity. So you need to understand that reserve contributions are an ongoing bill just like any other bill. They're not luxuries. And please be reminded that reserve contributions are not too expensive. If you have some homeowners saying they're too expensive, we can't afford them, you can tell them that no, they're wrong. Wonderfully, there's some tremendous economies of scale. Reserve contributions for the average condo association, and remember that homeowner association reserve contributions are much less because they aren't paying for any residential assets. Condo reserve contributions are about the same size as a cost of a premium coffee per day. It's just a trivial expense for an average homeowner to be able to pay for that ongoing cost of reserve deterioration. It's about the same cost as a premium cup of coffee, and that's not a big deal. Well, we've had so many things that we could touch on. Kelly and I had to take some time to whittle this presentation down to what we felt were the core issues, and we've been working, as I indicated earlier, basically as guides, helping our association clients move towards a successful future for decades now. We see the same root sources of conflict over and over again, and we wanted to present this webinar to help associations eliminate those sources of conflict and give you a few helpful hints so you can stay on, in this illustration, the main trail, minimizing the stress and conflict and misadventures that might come your way. And we've, of course, got a few follow-up resources for you. There's the Association Reserves website, which is reservesay.com. On our website, you can see a robust learning center that has some great written and video resources. You can clearly request a proposal if you need an update and would like Association Reserves on your team. And of course, you can join our email list if you're not getting notifications of these kinds of seminars. And similarly, Kelly has the Richardson Ober website. You can see Kelly there in the middle, and they have a great number of resources. Particularly what I like is if I've missed his column that appears in a number of newspapers, you can catch up on what he's written there. Great stuff. It applies to so many associations across the country. Great tips. So I do want to thank you on behalf of Kelly and myself for attending today, for carving out a little bit of your valuable time. We hope we were able to point out a few mistakes that you might have overlooked that you didn't realize you were making, so we can help you make some of those minor course corrections that will lead towards peace and success at your association. So with the time remaining, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Paige, mystery voice you heard at the beginning of today's session, who will serve as our MC for the Q&A portion of our program. Paige.
Thank you, Robert and Kelly.